My name is Pastor Justin Morris with the Pentecostal Evangelical Church, and this is my son Chance. And today we're going to be studying Rachel. But first, I wanted you to kind of comment about the music that you heard before. There is a fountain. Now that is an old hymn that Citizens and Saints in 2014 had redone. And so, I don't think there's anything real wrong with redoing the songs as long as the message is still there. Maybe try to revive these older hymns. And I think it's a great way of getting them back into our society and into the rotation, because several years ago I'd heard about a church that had a hymn burning party. In other words, they were burning hymn books and only going with what was modern out there. And so that was super sad. It's almost like burning the Bible, And so anyways, I thought it was a great song for us today. And so before we go any further, I wanted to go to our prayer requests. I've got a couple of personal ones here. My wife Anna has been going to the doctor, and she had to get some antibiotics for her throat. And she's been tested negative for the coronavirus, but she's still dealing with this. And so I just pray right now that you will all reach out a hand and ask for God to heal this completely. I've been praying about a decision to go into funeral directing, and I've been looking at a lot of stuff online, and I'm thinking there might be a roadblock for me to, because I've got a bachelor's degree in business management, and a lot of those classes will transfer over to funeral management. But then I found a mortician to help me out to work under, but there's going to be some other things I have to go through. So I don't know. That's being in the ministry and in the funeral business would go hand in hand. You could really be there for people when they're hurting, and I've always found that profession very intriguing. And so I'm just kind of praying about it and seeing what God's going to do for me there. And I always like to pray for our country and what we're going through, and that we can get up and running pretty quickly here. So, okay, before we actually go into Rachel, there was Pastor TC out of Dallas, Texas. He has a church there, and he's still holding services, which I think is awesome. I think that when if the church in China can have church illegally, and because they're doing it because what the Bible says, to forsake not thyself assemblings together. If they can take a chance of being killed for their faith and having church, I think it's awesome that pastors are still doing it, because what the government's trying to do is stop us from having church, basically. And that's one of the last phases they're going to allow is for churches to reopen. And so you may have your opinion on that, and that's perfect. I love it if you put your comments down. I'm not going to argue with you or I'm not going to come against you in any way, because I'm just really practicing my humble spirit. And I think it takes more strength to be humble than it is to be prideful, because people have no problem lashing out. But Pastor TC still having church, which is awesome. And he watched our study on Noah and about how the daughters of Noah didn't actually make it into the ark. And we don't know what happened to them, whether they died before the ark sailed or they married off into different households and didn't make it in. And Pastor TC was saying, it just goes to show how important to be equally yoked is important. I mean, that's how important it is. We can be caught up in a flood and be washed away or carried away by the sins of the world by just not being equally yoked. And in other words, being married to if you're getting married to a non-believer, dating a non-believer, you can really get carried away by that. And so I thought, wow, I wish I would have thought of that, and we would have thrown that in the video too and put it in my book. But I wanted to do a shout out today about it. And so, okay, thanks, Pastor TC. I loved that comment, and it really opened my eyes to that, and I just thought it was profound, actually. And so go ahead and get your books. The 100. While I take a drink of coffee, turn to page 50. Okay. Awesome coffee. That's in my Fallout 4 mug.
Yeah.
Chance and I like to play video games. He's so much better than I at it, but I will tell you this: he may be a gamer, but he's a Bibler too. He knows the Bible, so I'm pretty excited about that. Okay, so we're going to go into Rachel. I trust that you got to page 50 in your book of the 100, and so Rachel is the Hebrew word that means ewe, which E-W-E, which is on the screen, and it's basically a sheep is what it is. I actually, a little embarrassed about this, but I actually had to look it up because I was like, what the heck is that? Ew. That's what I thought it was. Right. And here we have sheep in our pasture, and so I learned something new. I'm 50 years old and learned something new. So what is it, you?
Sheep.
Yeah, and you're 14, you already learned it. So look at that. He's already way ahead of me, like almost 40 years ahead of me there. So awesome. So it's translated sheep. And she's kind of sheepish, I guess. Very timid, according to what the Bible says. And so she was the daughter of Laban. Do you remember who Laban? Do you remember who he is?
Yes. He was the uncle of Jacob.
And who else? Uncle of who else?
Esau.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so what was the deal with that whole situation? Jacob met his uncle how? Do you remember?
He tricked Esau not once but twice out of getting like the blessings to be like the ruler of the family, like the older brother.
The blessing and the birthright.
The birthright, yes.
Yeah, get a little closer.
Okay.
If you're not going to speak up, boy, get closer. Okay. Okay. All right. So yeah, we know that that was Jacob's uncle, and it was Rachel's father. So yes. Kind of they kept it in the family, so to speak. Okay. So, but something interesting about this too is if you remember this story about the servant going to find a wife for Isaac, and he found Rebekah in Genesis chapter 24, verse 29. This was actually Laban's sister. Okay, and so this is how that worked out. And I was kind of trying to figure how these different families interconnected and the timelines and everything, and that's what popped up. So it's pretty cool. So she was born around 1800 BC. So, right. Long time, like over like 3,600 years, something like that, or well, no, more than that, 3,800 years. So long time ago. And and this was according to my Bible timeline, and you can look up here on the wall and it'll show it. And they lived in Haran, where she actually met Jacob, her husband. And here's a map that kind of shows, and you can see the red balloon dot, or the red balloon pointer there, where Haran was. And if you look to the east, you'll see Nineveh. And then you can go way down south, and there's Babylon there. So I do these maps like this, so it gives you an idea of where these places would have been set during the Old Testament times. But this is also modern-day Turkey, all right? And then if you look, also, here's a picture of the ruins. The cool thing about the Bible is, Chance, is when it talks about cities in the Bible, we can actually go to those places where they say they are and do archaeology digs, and they're there.
Yeah.
And so there's books out there of other religions that state cities and everything, and there's no evidence. And so we know that the Bible's true scientifically, archaeology, yes, and by faith.
There's scientific facts that it's proven.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. So, it's so cool how we have people out there that are atheists, and what they'll do is they'll try to disprove the Bible, and they end up proving it right, and they become Christians. I love that. I love how God works. And so, all right, so she was the older sister, she had an older sister.
She was the younger sister.
Yep. And what was her older sister's name?
Leah.
Leah, that's right. Yeah. And Leah had become Jacob's wife first by what?
Trickery.
Yep, trickery. Yep, he got tricked. But I mean, that just was the custom. The olders always married off first.
Right.
And Jacob just didn't find love for Leah like he found for Rachel. The Bible says that she was tender-eyed, but it says it makes it very specific that Rachel was beautiful. And so some commentaries would say that Leah just didn't have the figure that Rachel had.
Ugly.
She wasn't ugly. She was tender-eyed.
But he liked Rachel more.
Yeah, and the Bible does claim that Rachel was beautiful, and so, but that's maybe it sounds like Jacob was a little shallow. So, all right, and so Rachel had 2 children, and those children's name was Joseph and Benoi.
All right, well, say it's Ben-Ani.
Ben-Ani, yeah, but it was changed to Benjamin.
Yeah.
And she had actually died during that childbirth. And and this is one thing I want to kind of stop and talk about. Joseph, this is the Joseph of the coat of many colors. Remember that story?
Yes.
Yeah, this is that Joseph, that same Joseph. And as I was studying that this morning, I was looking for some fun facts, and that's one of them that was brought up. And I was like, oh, hey, this is the same Joseph. Because there's 10 different Josephs in the Bible. Were you familiar with that?
Yeah, there was a lot of.
Yeah. Most of them we don't really hear a whole lot about. Mm-hmm. The 3 that we really hear about is this one. Then Joseph's Jesus' father, and then Joseph of Arimathea, however you say that, which is the one that buried Jesus.
Right.
With Nicodemus.
Well, 2 of them in the New Testament.
Yeah, those are the 2 in the New Testament that we really know about. And then this one we really know about because he was sold into slavery because his brothers were jealous of him. He was more loved by his father, Jacob, than all of the other brothers. And
right.
So, do you know any more about that?
Yeah, he actually became second to the king in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Or to the Pharaoh, as I should say.
Yeah. And then what was going on during that time?
There is famine.
Famine? Mm-hmm.
Famine, yes.
In the land, and what was the deal with the 7-year thing?
There were 7 good years where crops were plentiful, giving people a chance to stock up, since the Pharaoh had a dream, which Joseph was able to interpret, so they were able to prepare for the famine, and so they had supply.
So they had plenty to because God told them, hey, there's going to be a famine in the land, and if you don't stock up, you're going to be in trouble. And so they had all this, and everybody came to them, right?
Right.
Supply and demand. And it couldn't be a better person to be in charge of that, a God-fearing man, because he could have been an evil man and really caused a lot
charged a lot.
Oh, and caused slavery. You will work 10 days for one little thing of wheat,
Right.
There's some evil people back in those days. So yeah, that's great. Yeah. And so he was the 11th child out of all of them. Mm-hmm. And so either way, we didn't talk anything in my book about that Joseph. And so that's the reason why I kind of like to elaborate a little bit, on those kind of people when they're not actually in there. And so since we're not, because there's about 25 chapters about Joseph. I think chapter 20, I can't remember, but there's quite a few chapters, maybe 15, 20 chapters in Genesis on Joseph alone. You could write a whole book on Joseph. In fact, I might write that down and do something like that. So, anyways, yeah, you could write a whole commentary on that guy.
Yeah.
All right. So the story goes about Rachel, is this takes place in Genesis chapter 29, if you want to read the story about that. She meets Jacob, he falls in love with her, and makes a deal to work the 7 years. He gets tricked, he has to work another 7 years, and finally gets her, and then, all right. And we talked about how it's customary for the older sister to be married.
Yeah.
And he loved Rachel more. We talked all about that. And so we know that Leah had 6 boys and 1 girl, and she had 2. And but they're...
At first, Rachel was barren.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and she... Rachel gets upset with Jacob. This is the funny thing. And tells him that if he doesn't give her children, she's going to die. And he's like, hey, it's out of my control. And this is in verse 2. He's like, I'm not God. I don't give the fruit of barrenness and things like that. So let's read Genesis chapter 30, verses 1 through 2. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. Verse 2, Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? So, I mean, he's like, I'm not at fault.
Right.
I mean,
I don't control that.
We're doing everything we can to make that happen. And so she does what every impatient woman in the Bible does, and she gives him her servant to have children. Now, I know there's going to be some comments. Well, what are you talking about, impatient women? You're a, egotistic man. No, I'm just saying there's many explanations, or there's many examples in the Bible that people got impatient with God and did it themselves.
Abraham's wife.
That's right. I was just going to say Abraham's. Yeah.
Wrong person.
No, you're right. Yeah. Abraham's wife, Sarah.
Yeah.
They got impatient. And what's the first son they had? What was his name?
Ishmael.
That's right. Ishmael. And God said that you're going to have a baby, and he's not going to be well liked, and he's not going to like very many people. And so he wasn't a very nice guy. In fact, he harassed Isaac.
Yeah.
Yeah. And tormented him. So it doesn't always work out. Okay. So in verse 3, then she said, here is my servant Bilhah. Go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her. Okay, now from verses 4 through 24, there's this baby war that's going on between the two women. And in verses 22 through 24, Rachel has a breakthrough. She finally gets pregnant. And I mean, Leah's giving her servant to Jacob, and then Rachel's giving her servant to Jacob, and they're going back and forth, and Leah's having children, and there's like this baby war going. Who can have the most children? Even if they don't have them, they have them through their servants. And but this is what verse 22 through 24 says. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. Verse 24, and she called his name Joseph, saying, may the Lord add to me another son. And so, despite her faithless acts, and the lack of faith,
right? What
does God do?
Still gives her children.
Gives her children. That lets her produce, open her womb. But she wasn't always perfect, was she?
No.
What did she do?
She stole idols from her father and then lied about it.
Yeah, lied about it. And was she ever found out?
No.
Now, what would have happened if she would have been caught?
She would have been killed.
That's right. Yep, the scripture says that. And so in Genesis 31:19, she stole her father's idols and lied about it when they were leaving. They actually ran away. Her father was gone, and then that's when Jacob and his whole family and everything. In fact, the thing is, he had been messed over several times by his uncle, and being own family, been messed over because he'd say, okay, he had dropped his pay several times and messed him over like that, and he'd worked for him for 20 years, and 6 years after that, he got his wives, and said, okay, all you're going to get from here on out is any spotted goats that are born, you get those. And so all the goats that were being born during that time were all spotted. And he's like, uh-oh. So then he comes to him and says, this is your pay. Only the striped goats, any goats that have stripes on them, you get those. And I keep everything else. Well, then all the goats were striped. And the angel of the Lord had done that every time that Laban tried to mess him over. God would, okay, then these are all. So he had all these animals.
Right.
So God didn't like the fact that Laban was messing him over. And so,
even though he was being faithful to him.
He's being very faithful, worked for him, and he was humble. And I've said this before, it takes more strength to be humble. Remember this, guys. It takes more strength to be humble than it does to be prideful. See, prideful people that walk around with their chest all, and they're all, they look good, they got a little muscle on them, and all the ladies all over them, and they're walking around like this, thinking they're all that. And then you've got people that are very humble, sitting quiet. Prideful people think that is weakness, to be humble. And you know what? It takes more strength to be humble than it does to be prideful. And Jacob was being very humble, doing what the Lord had asked him to do. Now, he wasn't perfect either. We know that.
Right.
Okay. But people change. People have, and he did. And so, anyways, they took off, and Laban chases them. And in verse 32, it says that Jacob had in verse 32, it states that Jacob had no idea that Rachel had stolen those idols.
Right.
Why she wanted them, I don't understand. Maybe to sell because they were gold. I didn't see any explanation of why she took those. Because she was, assumed she was a servant of God. So why would she want those gold gods or those idols other than to sell? I don't know. But either way, she stole them. And in verses 34 and 35, when they were searching and everything, before that, in verse 34 and 35, it says that she hid them where?
In her camel bag.
Yeah. And then why didn't they find them?
She was sitting on them.
Okay. And what excuse did she give for not standing up for her father?
Basically her monthly period.
Yeah, her monthly cycle. Yes. And so says, Father, I can't stand up because I'm, in this situation. But in verse 35, it says, and Rachel said to her father, Father, don't be angry with me. I am not able to stand up before you. I am having my monthly time of bleeding. That's what the word says here. So Laban looked through the camp, but he did not find the gods from his house. So in verse 32, like you said, if Jacob said, hey, if you find them, whoever took them, they'll be killed, and the men here have been my witness. And she didn't die at that point in time, did she?
No.
Yeah, so she does die, though, obviously, in Genesis 30, chapter 35, verses 16 through 18. It talks about how she was given birth and she died during childbirth. And they buried her in Bethlehem. And Jacob had marked her grave with a pillar of rocks. And so, anyhow, kind of to sum this thing up, was she perfect?
No.
She made mistakes. She did things or not mistakes. She made bad choices. What's a mistake? Do you know what a mistake is?
Like doing something and you mess up on it.
Well, you don't know the outcome.
Right.
Yeah. A bad choice, you pretty much know what the outcome is going to be, but you choose to do it anyways. That is considered sin. A mistake is not sin. A mistake is something you do like, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen like that. Okay? And there was no intention of wrongdoing. So when people come to me when I was a recruiter and say, I made a lot of mistakes in my life, I said, no, call them what they are. You made bad choices, man. And I just dime them out. I said, man, you didn't make no mistake. You knew what you were doing. So, Rachel knew what she was doing at times, but the bottom line is, there was quite there was Joseph that came from her, and Joseph had saved a lot of people from dying from starvation. So, out of her womb came another godly man, huh?
Yeah, and she also had Benjamin.
That's right.
You didn't mention that.
Yeah. She died having Benjamin.
He was originally named Ben-Ani, but then was changed to Benjamin.
Yeah, can you tell me anything about Benjamin?
He was the youngest of them all.
Yep. Yeah. So, okay. Well, hey, I hope you've enjoyed the study as much as we have, and we'll talk to you later.